Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I'm starting a wintry reading vlog. I did one of these back in the fall where I read fall recommendations from some of you, and it was just like so delightful to kind of compile all the footage into one video and read some books I was really excited to read, because one of my goals for this year is to lean more heavily into seasonal reading, because it just helps me enjoy the season that I'm in right now, both literally and also, metaphorically. It helps me like really soak in the time where I am right now. This is the perfect time to start this vlog because there is a wintry storm hitting us. Right now, we're supposed to get like 3 to 5 inches of snow. I don't know if that's what we're going to get or not because it's southern Kentucky, so you just never know what you're going to end up with. But I did already begin. So I have this collection of Pushkin short stories, and this morning I read The Blizzard. It can also be translated as The Snowstorm, depending on what translation you have. And it was really, really fun. It was only about 10 pages long, and it's about these two young people who are very much in love, but the girl is from money and means and the boy is not, so the parents don't approve, and they have a plan to elope together, and then there's a snowstorm. And that's all I'm going to say because it's very, very short, but it was a perfect wintry read to start out my day. I also started Ethan Frome, and I'm a few chapters in at the time of this recording. And so I know that I'm going to have mixed feelings about this story because I just love Edith Wharton's writing, but I know that her characters can be quite unlikable. They were in, well, the main character, the narrator, was in the one that I read. And so I've heard lots of people really hate Ethan Frome, and I don't know anything about it, and I'm going to keep it that way because there's only 100 pages. So beginning, it feels very wintry. It's got a nice wintry cover. Something I do love about it already is that it takes place in a very tiny fictional town in Western Massachusetts, and my husband and I are from Western Massachusetts, so there's other cities or small towns being mentioned that are near where we lived, and so that's kind of a cool thing. It does take place in winter, and that just feels like the setting is just so perfect. I want to read one of these descriptions to you because I just love it. In a sky of iron, the points of the dipper hung like icicles, and Orion flashed his cold fires. The moon had set, but the night was so transparent that the white house fronts between the elms looked gray against the snow. Clumps of bushes made black stains on it, and the basement windows of the church sent shafts of yellow light far across the endless undulations. So, I love Edith Wharton's writing so much, and so I think that I'm really going to love that. I know kind of the setup of the story, and it's that there is a man named Ethan Frome who is married to a very sickly wife, and her cousin is staying with them to help like be a caretaker for her. And that's the setup for the story. And I already kind of don't like Ethan, which is probably the point. I really didn't like Archer in The Age of Innocence either, which is the other one that I read. I think his name's Archer. Anyways, so far I haven't liked the main male characters of Edith Wharton's stories, and I think that this is going to be the same. I don't dislike the women so far. I have an idea of where the story is going because the beginning of it kind of gives some indications of some undercurrents and things that are happening. So I kind of have an idea of where the story is going, but there's a preface to the story where it's told from our original narrator who's moved to this small town and encounters Ethan for the first time, and then the story that follows is Ethan's narrative of what happened. And so we've seen Ethan now that he's older, and we're flashing back to his younger days when his wife was younger and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so I have some ideas, but it might end up being more tragic than I suspect. I don't know. I feel like I'm definitely going to have mixed feelings, but I've really wanted to read some more Edith Wharton because I love her writing. I have some other options of books that I can read, and I should have brought them in here, but I'm going to wait till I finish Ethan Frome, and then I'm also currently reading another book for another like reading challenge I'm not really going to talk about here because it's not really relevant. But once I finish those, I have some more wintry books. So I have The Winter Garden by Kristen Hanna. Actually, it might just be Winter Garden. And this is a historical fiction that takes place in Leningrad. Feels like super snowy Spoilery. I also have Winter People by Jennifer McMahon, which is a spooky story that I know nothing about other than it looks wintry. And then I have The Foxwife by Yangtze Chu, which is a fantasy based on Chinese mythology surrounding foxes. And that's the one I like kind of want to read the most, but also it's the one that I don't own. Well, I don't own Winter People either. I'm borrowing that from my sister, but I own Winter Garden and I've had it on my shelves for several years. And so I feel like that's the one I should read, but I don't know what I'm going to be in the mood for. So I might do like try a chapter and see which one's grabbing me the most. But I will update you once I have finished Ethan Frome. Hello, I have finished Ethan Frome, and I do have thoughts. So I actually finished this in 2 sittings. I probably could have finished it in one, but I had to be responsible. So I finished it in 2 sittings. And I know that I said that I thought I was going to have mixed feelings about this, but in all honesty, I thought I was going to low-key hate it because I kind of had an idea of some of the themes that the book was dealing with beforehand, and it's off-putting to most people and not likable characters, like what I said. So I thought for sure that I was going to love Edith Wharton's writing, but honestly hate the novella as a whole. And that just didn't happen. I actually kind of loved it, which is so shocking. Like, I can't believe it. I feel like I shouldn't like it and enjoy it as much as I did. But there are some elements to it that were ambiguous enough that I think helped me throughout the entirety of the story. But honestly, I was kind of like on the edge of my seat. I felt like my heart was in my throat the entire time that I was reading this book because I just had this sense of dread and wondering what was going to come next and how this story was going to resolve, because it didn't look like it was going to resolve well for anybody, but I didn't know how it was going to turn out. I don't know how I can talk more about this without being spoilery, but I do want to talk about it more. So I don't usually do this in vlogs like this, but I'm going to have a spoiler section, and if you've not read Ethan Frome, you can skip over this section, and that's totally fine. In the next section, we talk about like what I'm reading next. Okay, so I don't think that Ethan is a very likable character. So I knew that going in, and it seems like, at least based on the couple of Edith Whartons I've read, it seems like Edith Wharton really likes to write about adultery or the temptation of adultery, the allure of someone else when you are promised to someone else. And so I kind of figured that's where this was going. But part of the thing is that with Maddie, I couldn't tell if Ethan was just projecting how he felt onto her and like assuming she felt the same way, or if she actually did genuinely like him too, because it was really hard for me to tell up until like towards the end when it's time for her to leave and like they confess their feelings for each other and all of those kinds of things. It's not up until that point that I really know. And I still I genuinely don't fault Maddie because she's so much younger, or seems so much younger than Ethan and his wife. And so it seems like she's so young and Ethan should not have really taken advantage of her and like flirted with her in the way that he did. And she's an orphan, and every single relative that she's stayed with has resented her and passed her on as fast as they could, as long as they could say, well, I've done my duty by keeping her this long. Now she's someone else's problem. And she's finally in the first place where it seems like someone's actually kind to her and actually likes her being there, that person being Ethan. So it makes sense that over time she would have feelings for him. So I actually really don't fault her, because it like almost feels like a grooming situation. Not that that was really, I think, Ethan's intention, but like Ethan also like he married his wife just because he was lonely, and it seems like he didn't realize until it was too late that that's not a good enough reason to marry someone. But I feel like his wife kind of gets the short end of the stick, because I feel like she thought that he actually genuinely cared about her, and by the time that he didn't, he realizes that it's too late and he can't change it, and he's just unhappy until Maddie comes along, and now he's like obsessed with her. And it's like she's so embittered towards him and so unkind to him and so unjust to Maddie as a result, when Maddie actually didn't ever make any advances toward Ethan. She just keeps it all quiet, which is why I didn't know whether or not she actually cared about Ethan or was attracted to him in any way. I honestly legitimately couldn't tell until towards the end, and that actually made it more palatable for me as well. I don't really blame his wife for not wanting someone there that she is well aware that her husband is super attracted to and longs for in a way that he never cared about her. I don't really blame her for feeling that way, but she's just so bitter and so unkind and so unlikable. And just the way that this story resolves is so so beyond the scope of what I thought was going to happen in terms of a tragic ending. And I was just like, my jaw hit the floor. Like, that was not what I expected at all. I feel like this is showing the consequences of Maddie and Ethan's feelings towards each other, as well as the consequences of the bitterness and unkindness of Xena as well. Maybe that's why, is that he doesn't seem excusable to me, and then he very much reaps the consequences of his folly, of his actions, in multiple ways, in like a very almost spontaneously, like marrying his wife, like so off the cuff, being like, I don't want to be alone, so I'm going to marry you. He reaps the consequences of that, and then reaping the consequences of his feelings for Maddie as well. So yeah, I don't know, like that to me actually like redeemed the story for me, because there definitely seems to be like a theme of love versus duty, and then, you know, like reaping the consequences of sin and poor choices. So I ended up really, really, really enjoying it. Like, I'm just as surprised as you are, probably. Okay, spoilers over. Let's move on to what I'm reading now. So I said I had some other options of things that I would like to read. So I did do try a chapter. I actually didn't do try a chapter for The Foxwife because I have read the first chapter of this before. I ended up doing a judge a book by its cover thing last summer, and I chose a bunch of books based on the cover and read the first chapter. And one of my favorites was The Foxwife, but it had a really wintry feel. So I decided I didn't want to read it in August and I wanted to read it in the winter. So I had already read the first chapter of that, but I kind of was like just looking at the other ones. And so I read the first chapter of The Winter People, and I feel like the writing is very vivid, but I don't know if this is what I want to read right now, at least. It's historical. I didn't realize it was historical, and it has like a bunch of different viewpoints. We've got like, I think there's like a dual timeline element going on, but then we also have like a diary entry that you have for the very beginning, and then after that you have Martin's perspective, and then Birdie's perspective, and then Martin's perspective again, and then other people's perspectives. And it just feels like it's skipping back and forth so much. And then there's also a past and present tense within the skipping back and forth and the different people. And I just like really don't want to read something that's hopping all over the place that much. Plus, I'm not sure I'm really in the mood for something spooky. So I started reading Winter Garden, and I love Kristen Hanna's writing. I like the way that she writes just in general, but it's been a long time since I've read one of her books. The last one was The Nightingale, and it just absolutely emotionally devastated me. And that was my first year in BookTube 4 years ago almost, and I haven't been ready to pick up another Kristen Hanna. So I think I'm really intrigued by this for a couple of reasons. First of all, I love anything Russian. The historical component of this is supposed to take place in Leningrad during like Stalin's regime, and that's really fascinating to me. So we're opening with these two sisters and them as children, and then I think we have them as adults as well. But here's the thing that really intrigues me. So they live on an apple orchard that their father owns. Their father is an American white man who marries this Russian woman, and then we're following the two children who are children in like the prologue and then adults in the rest of the book. But anyways, they live on this apple orchard called Bella Noche. And that is Russian for White Nights. And I'm also currently reading White Nights by Dostoevsky. So I'm really curious to see if those two intertwine, even though Dostoevsky's time period was not during Stalin, it was well before that. But the fact that that's mentioned makes me really curious. So I've decided I'm going to continue with this one because I want to see if there's more Dostoevsky parallels. We'll see. I'll keep you updated and I'll tell you what I think. Guys, it's been a little bit of time since I updated, although it won't seem that way to you, I guess, once I edit this all together. But I just wanted to update you on what I have been reading. We've still been having super wintry weather around here, and even on days when like it's getting warmer, we've still had like some snow flurries in the morning and stuff. So it's been a very wintry January, and I'm not angry about that. It's actually fit perfectly with this vlog, but also just for the season in general. So the book that I ended up continuing on with was Winter Garden by Kristen Hanna. And it's interesting because Kristen Hanna writes historical fiction, and sometimes she'll do like a dual timeline thing. At least she did in The Nightingale. She didn't in The Great Alone, I don't think. But in The Nightingale, it was the same person that was in the past timeline. So this doesn't really have a flash back and forth because it's about these two sisters who are very different from each other and raised by a very loving and doting father and a very cold and standoffish mother who grew up in Russia. And so it basically reads like a contemporary. There hasn't been any historical context yet. I think that we're supposed to get some as the book continues, because the very first part of the book talks about these girls deciding they're going to put on a play for Christmas when they're children of a fairy tale that their mother told them, and that like really upset their mother and like caused a rift between them, even though there already was a rift, honestly. So yeah, so that's the only historical component, is that her mother's telling these fairy tales. And you know, like immediately, that these fairy tales have to do with like her real life. Like that they're not actually truly fairy tales. So the girl's father gets sick. They're adults now. One of them is like a jet-setting photographer for like all these magazines and stuff. And then the other sister has stayed home and worked on like the apple farm and all of that kind of stuff. She's married. She has 2 children who are in college. The father gets really sick, and he makes his wife promise that she's going to tell the fairy tale to her children that she started to tell them when they were small and then stopped after that play happened. So anyways, yeah, so I got this far into it, which doesn't look like that much, but it's exactly 100 pages that I read, and I just can't take it anymore. I'm just gonna be honest. Like, I don't find any of the characters sympathetic. Like, I know that the sisters are grieving and grew up in a lot of dysfunction, but they also had like a really loving father, and like he was always trying to like bridge between their cold mother, and they're just like, I just don't care about them. I'm just annoyed by them, the way that they behave and how selfish all of them are. Even like the older sister who's trying to hold the whole family together and do all the things and stay busy so that way she doesn't like fall apart because she can't afford to fall apart, kind of a thing. It's still all about herself. She's acting like she's doing it for other people, but she's doing it because she doesn't want to be vulnerable. So like all of them are just like, I'm just annoyed by them, and I don't feel sorry for any of them except the dad, that he has this family of a whole bunch of selfish people. And that's harsh. I know a lot of people love this. Maybe I would love it if I continue, but I'm just really not liking it. And I have no commitment to read this whatsoever, so I don't have to continue it. So I'm done with this. It does tie in with White Nights by Dostoevsky in the fact that that's the name of their apple farm, is like White Nights. And then also, I think the fairy tale takes place during White Nights too, which is apparently like just a time period where like the sun doesn't fully set, so the nights are brighter and all that kind of stuff. So anyways, I'm done with this, and I picked up a couple of other things. So I picked up The Wood at Midwinter by Susanna Clarke, and I already knew that this was a short story going into it, and it's set in the world of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. So I was really, really excited, couldn't wait to pick it up, and I was really disappointed by it because it feels like it's like mostly illustrations more than it is story. And the illustrations are beautiful. I showed a clip actually in one of my vlog sections. It's absolutely gorgeous, stunning illustrations. The story itself could have been interesting, could have been good, but it's like very, very bare bones. In fact, like the author's note at the end is longer than the story is. And it was really interesting because Susanna Clarke goes on and talks about how much she loves Borges, and his library at Babel was like inspiration for Piranesi, which I didn't realize, which is interesting because I got those vibes from reading Piranesi. And then this story that she wrote as well as Piranesi was also inspired by the House of Styrian. So it's really cool to see that and see some of her influences, and that was really enjoyable, and the illustrations were really pretty, but the story itself felt very lackluster. It actually felt like a footnote in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and there was absolutely nothing mentioned about either of them or any location that I remember them being. So it just feels like a fantastical story that would have been a long footnote in that book. It was okay, but it was disappointing. So I'm going to try to wrap up this vlog with one more book that hopefully I will enjoy more than the one I DNF'd and the one I was disappointed with. And so right now I am currently reading The Foxwife by Yangsze Chu. This was one of the ones that was an option. I just didn't really feel like I wanted to read The Winter People, even though that was also an option. I'm just not really in the mood for something spooky, and I'm also not in the mood for something, I was going to say historical, but The Foxwife is historical too, but it's just more interesting to me right now. So it takes place in 1908, so it is historical. And we've got two timelines that we're following. So we've got a woman who is a fox in Chinese mythology. So she is going about doing things. I think there's some revenge that she wants to enact, but we don't know like the story of why yet. I'm only about 10% of the way through when I'm filming this update. And then we also follow a man named Bao, who has this like supernatural ability to tell whether or not people are lying. If they lie around him, he hears like this buzzing noise, so he knows when people are lying, and as such, he's had a very successful career as a detective. And he's been called on by someone who wants the answers for this woman who has turned up dead, and so he's trying to figure it out. There seems to be some implication that there are some foxes involved, and he's always wanted to encounter a fox because of his grandmother and the way that she revered the fox gods. So he's hoping that there are foxes involved, and that's kind of like where we are right now in the story. I don't really know exactly where we're going with this, but I love the mythology of nine-tailed foxes in Korean mythology, and then there's also fox mythology within Japanese and Chinese cultures as well, so this is a Chinese book if I didn't already mention that. But I'm really liking how it's written. I have it on my Kindle, but I also have it on audio, so I've been alternating the two. So my hope is that I can finish this over the weekend, because at the time of me filming this, there is one weekend left in January. So I would really like to finish up that book or something, have some sort of closure to this vlog. So there should be one more update, I hope, after this, letting you know my thoughts on Foxwife, and I'll talk to you then. Hello, it is time to wrap up this vlog. It's actually January 31st, and I did not finish The Fox God Wife over the weekend like I wanted to, but I did finish it in time for the end of the month so I can share my final thoughts with you. I was really hoping I would kind of end on a bang with one that I really enjoyed, and it's been interesting because I feel like I've read a really wide range of wintry books this month, in that I've read and DNF'd historical fiction. Susanna Clarke's was fantasy. Ethan Frome and the Pushkin short story were both classics. And then this is like historical and fantasy. It's got both of those elements to it. So I was really interested in it, but I found myself not being very emotionally invested, unfortunately. I actually might have DNF'd this if I hadn't had this vlog because I already DNF'd one book and I kind of didn't want to DNF another, because it's not so much that this book was terrible, it's that I just wasn't very invested. There would be really interesting things that would happen here and there, but I wasn't, like I said, I just wasn't really connected to the characters to care enough what happened to them. But I did really love all the mythology and just different belief systems, how the foxes are operating, things that are happening with that. And that was enough to carry me through and let me finish. The cool part about the audiobook is that the author actually narrates the audiobook, which I have not seen happen very frequently with fictional books. I see it quite frequently with memoirs and stuff, but I don't know if I've really listened to very many audiobooks where the author has narrated their own book. I think the only other one maybe that I have is, I think, one of E.B. White's books. I think Charlotte's Web. I think he did an audiobook of that. Anyways, so the two perspectives that we're following, something that really started irritating me about it is I don't know if the author did this just to differentiate from the viewpoints, but when we're following the fox, whose name is unclear. She's going by Asan with her person that she's working for, but her fox name is Snow. So she's got multiple different names throughout. But anyways, when we're following her perspective, it is first person past tense. And then when we're following Bao the detective, it's third person present tense. But the two timelines are happening simultaneously. So I don't know why one is present tense and one is past tense. That's something that really irritates me anyway, when authors just slip in and out of past and present tense. It's no big deal. I really don't like it when that happens. So I don't know if she did that as a stylistic choice to try to differentiate from the two narratives. But when we're with Bao, we're very much in his head, even though it's written in third person. So I don't know why she wouldn't just try to write them both in first person or both in third person and just have their voices feel more distinctive. The other thing is that the foreshadowing is so heavy-handed that every time there was any sort of reveal of what was really going on, I knew what was going on chapters and chapters and chapters before. I think last time I told you is that the fox wanted some sort of revenge. Right after that I found out why. And then we get answers truly as to why. And I'm yeah, well, you foreshadowed this so strongly. I absolutely knew. And there's mysteries as to okay, well, there's this woman that turned out dead that Bao's investigating. And then there's this, and there's stories from his childhood, and everything's so heavily foreshadowed that when anything is revealed, I was immediately yeah. Yeah, I don't know why this is a reveal because you've been foreshadowing it so heavily that I don't know how people would not know exactly what was going to happen. It was so obvious and nothing was surprising, which is interesting when you're choosing to do a book where one of the main characters is an investigator and it feels like it's going for this mysterious vibe, but I don't know if the mysterious vibe is because foxes are mysterious, or if elements of the story are truly supposed to be a mystery that we're trying to figure out with Bao. But I figured out everything way before he did, and I'm bad at that. If I am going to read any sort of whodunit, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to be shocked at the end and have no clue what was happening. And this wasn't even a book where I was trying to figure out what was happening. And yet still, it was just like really obvious. And I felt like a lot of scenes were kind of like repetitive because we'd see them from the fox's point of view, and then we'd see them from Bao's point of view, and then someone else who also had something to do with this would be like, let me tell you what I saw. And it just, I don't know. It just felt kind of disappointing, even though some of the writing was really, really beautiful, and the actual mythology itself was really, really fascinating. So I'd read something else that this author wrote, but The Foxwife just like really fell short for me. Anyway, that is the end of this vlog, ending really lackluster. The first couple of books I read, I liked way more than the last few that I read. So that is quite unfortunate. If you have read any of the books that I talked about here, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments as well. And also let me know what you've been reading lately. Have you been reading any wintry books, or have you been reading something else? I always love hearing what you guys are reading and what you're enjoying. Also, if you like this kind of like seasonal vlog format, if you have any great spring book recommendations, I would be very happy to hear them so I can kind of have them tucked away and maybe do a spring vlog at some point. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me. And I will see you again next time.